Live.
No.
You also kicked that got it up there on the screen.
I had no idea that was a touchscreen.
Yeah, Ingles taught us that
Yeah,
yesterday.
yeah.
No, we do it all the time on this screen.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So this is Senate Transportation. It is Wednesday, March 23rd, and we're doing a walkthrough of the House Transportation Bill 736. And we have Ledge Council and Dr. Cooper with us to do that.
Okay, so for the record, Anthony Dixon Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel. We are continuing to go through the sections of the T-bill that Michelle told Jeannie were probably not likely to have changes based on work that was continuing to happen in the House. And I expect that they will be talking about the T-bill in their caucus of the whole today. And then I think it'll be up for a second reading tomorrow and Friday, but you know, things going on with the big bill, who knows what's gonna happen there.
I have on the website page 736. What are you looking at? Is it a different draft or is this as introduced?
This is bill as introduced. This is bill as introduced.
Okay.
We're looking at the exact same thing. I just have had my paper copy.
I love paper.
I know.
It's like reading a book.
Yeah.
You
Some-
can mark in it a lot
You
easier.
can mark on it. You can take
Well,
it
you
to bed and read it.
You can tell when I'm marking it up when you see white out on my screen.
Section 22.
And yeah, we're gonna, I was thinking we'd do section 3 and then section 22. That was just the order that Jeannie had put it on the agenda. And then we are really truly almost done with the language that's not gonna have like a appropriation piece to it. So I think you're getting to a point where you will have seen all the T-bill except for the money changes. So section 3, this is on the bottom of page 9. This is amending language that you put into the T-bill last year, 2021 Acts and Resolves number 55. This was a Senate addition, and it had to do with having new goals for the placement of the level 3, the fast chargers, with proximity to the exits and one another along the state highway network. So the changes, if you look at what you had sort of structured last year, if you drew a circle around every exit from the interstate, you would need to have at least one fast charger within 5 miles of that exit.
Is it a circle or is it linear along the roads?
Within 1 mile of every exit. The next one is linear along the roads, the point to point one.
So the 5 miles has been shrunk to 1 mile.
Yes.
And that's as the crow flies.
I believe it's as the crow flies, but you know what? This would be a good question to ask Patrick Murphy when you hear from him on this, because this is a change that's coming on a federal level because they were required to shrink the circle for
I'm assuming
purposes of.
They should both be linear. I remember the goal that we had before we changed
Was
these
as
goals,
the
which was
crow flies.
50-mile radius, which didn't make much sense because it could be
Over
45 miles over a mountain, but it could give 60 miles again.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I am misremembering this. I think it would be 1 mile of road driving, but that is definitely something that Patrick will be able to confirm. And if you think based on hearing what he is saying, there should be clarity in this, we could put something in
So
there.
this is a federal standard now.
Yeah, it's gonna be the requirement for purposes of, I'm gonna get this, not this fully explained as Patrick will, but the short version is get NEVI money, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure money, that $21 million. You need to have a plan, and the plan requires them to be placed within 1 mile of interstate exits.
The level 3 center virtual charges, how fast?
There's different levels of level 3, but I think they start at 25 kilowatts and up to 350 kilowatts. So there's a difference, but I think there's probably an official definition of the size, but
So
I could just say my car does like 80 miles in about half an hour.
Is it? Half an hour gets you 80 miles more driving.
Something like that.
I thought it was more than that.
I guess it depends on how big the charging station, is. But
I don't want to get off
20
topic.
minutes. maybe.
I don't want to get off topic. I apologize if I am, so stop me if I am. But is there a warning on your car about how much you can plug in? I mean, can you go right to the 350 and then be fine with your?
I can plug into 350 even though my car will only go to 150. So you can, it just rate it.
Except regulates itself. You don't
Like
know.
your-
Okay.
A current, you can go to any country currency with your iPad and it will automatically convert.
Will, I don't know.
This,
I thought, just because it's something in that, I thought you had to have the adapters.
you do to put the plug
Right,
in,
yeah.
but not to have a different voltage than you would have in South America or Europe or Spain, Spain's in Europe.
Yeah, there's basically.
I can't give this up because it's been all over the world.
I'm trying, you gotta get those international stamps on.
I should.
Like the old.
That's like an old friend. It's also a sad commentary on our life when you have to take your iPad because the emails are so overwhelming. You
Yeah.
can't take a week or 10 days with coming back with thousands. Yeah. So it's, is this federal source part of the infrastructure bill?
Yeah.
And is there a match then?
So for the NEVI money, if we're now going to go a little bit into the money side of the T-bill. So language that is not changed by House Appropriations Amendment, and it does relate to this goal language that we're talking about, puts $6.25 million towards level 3 chargers along the highway consistent with these goals as amended. And section 2 of the T-bill references this language, this goal language. That $6.25 million is made up of $2 million ARPA, 100% federal, and then $4.25 million that's an 80-20 split on 80% NEVI and 20% T-fund dollars.
NEVI is what?
It's the IIJA money. I'm using so many acronyms. NEVI stands for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program Funds,
Which is part of,
which is part of what's being available through.
so it's an 80-20 match.
Yes.
That's,
Is that all laid out in section 2?
So section 2 says 6.25 million is authorized for level 3 chargers along the highway consistent with the goals, and it says as appropriated in the fiscal year 2023 budget bill. So it's referencing that as a way to not have to have as many things changed in the two bills as they move along. But the governor's recommend was to use that 2 million ARPA 4.25 80-20 split with the NEVI money and the T-fund dollars to match.
I just want to correct what I said, Senator Engels. I meant 80%, not 80 miles.
Oh, okay.
I was really stuck on that.
Yeah, I was,
So it's more than that. It's going to be more like 150 miles.
okay, yeah.
And
I
then
was actually Googling that.
you must like your electric vehicle with the
Gas prices.
gas.
Yeah.
And then for purposes of a definition for the level 3 chargers, the definition section for the T-bill is defining level 1 charger and level 2 charger based on the input voltage range, or that's for level 2, or that it can connect directly to a standard 120 volt AC outlet with an average output. But then for the level 3 charger definition, it just says electric vehicle supply equipment that uses dedicated direct current DC to provide energy to a plug-in electric vehicle. So I think within what Senator Persick was saying, there are different sort of,
What section
Ranges
is
of
that
that.
you're reading from?
that is section 1, and I was on page 3. Subdivisions 6, 7, and 8, starting on line 5.
You get to report that section.
We're going, Senator Mazza, we're going over the electric or
Okay.
charging equipment.
All right. Just an update on the mask. We discussed this for the last 45 minutes. And, I guess it was pretty well split. They're going to postpone another week for next Tuesday morning again with her. It was a lengthy debate. There are those that House folks and as well as Randy felt that the science has said that we should not optional, not optional, which I thought was a pretty good idea, but they were adamant about staying with this mandate until next Tuesday. But I again, I ask, what are you using for science to determine when to do it? I mean, well, we're gonna take another poll. Well, a poll doesn't mean much if you're not following the science. Say, Dr. Levine says it's okay, you're always gonna have 1 or 2 cases. I mean, that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So it was a lengthy debate and, I think we were lost. The House as well as, Allison was in favor of extending it another week. My question is, what are you gonna make your decision on? That's the question. If you're gonna listen to science, science says, okay, schools are gonna wait. I'm not qualified to make that decision.
Jordan Rules is gonna be Tuesday to talk about it.
Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock to yes or no, whether, you know, and it'll be an option.
Speaking about that, next Tuesday,
I'm sorry.
we're online, but Jeannie, I have to take Gil to the oncologist. The
Whatever.
28th is Tuesday, right? No, 28th is Monday, 29th. So I have to be out Tuesday morning.
Well, we're just gonna be working on the bill
We
anyway.
can schedule all the budget stuff.
Yeah, all the Linda bill projects.
Pass all the money stuff on Tuesday.
Linda, we'll save to schedule all your highway projects.
So that's Senator Ingles. He'll take credit for everything.
Oh, really? Oh, that's all your choice?
Yeah, thank you.
I heard they put part of Richmond, Vermont, in your district, in Shelburne.
Yeah, a little bit.
No, those are my district.
Senator Mitchell's over in Addison.
Connecticut River to Lake Champlain.
Bobby Starr wanted to do anything to put him down. Southern part of the
He doesn't
state.
want to put me in South America.
You got part of that one.
Actually, she ended up pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, sorry, already had it.
So Jeannie, if you make a note, I'm gonna be out. But we're, well, we have, in addition to losing his mind, he's got prostate. So,
Gotta take care of medical issues first.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
that's okay. So we talked about with the change in the goal, going back to page 10, for the distance to the exit, going from 5 miles to 1 mile, and then the distance between chargers along the state highway, that will drop from 50 miles to 25 miles. And Patrick will tell you that that is not a federal requirement, but it is where the Agency of Transportation suggests that the goal should be.
I agree with that. If we're really, if at 25 miles,
Okay,
50
yeah.
miles is quite a long way
Okay.
relative to a.
I mean, you would only be 25 miles from either of us two, if you're in the middle.
Well, I agree too, and I'm all
But
about
50 is still quite a ways if you're in the winter, particularly when you're really,
I guess if one's broken, you might have to go another 50 miles, so
Yeah.
that makes 25 miles more.
There was an interesting caller this morning called in on the radio. And he said his wife just bought a electric or hybrid. And he said it costs us $100 a month more electricity. I can't believe that, unless you travel 24 hours a day. That seems pretty high for me.
but when you think about what you'd be paying for gas,
Well, no, that was what,
that's
you know, he's-
$25.
well, he was anti-electric car and said, put all the money in roads. So our roads are terrible, put all the money there. But it was interesting, to say you went $100 more on a hybrid, and a hybrid is, you're running gas too, is that correct? Yeah, that's what I thought. But anyway,
Well, it only kicks in, right, when your battery gets low, so you could be
Yeah,
all
yeah.
electric. I don't consider that $25 a week.
well, no, what's it, dollar versus $4 now?
Dollar.
Depends on
Electric,
what electric company you're with on the price,
Oh.
but yeah, it can be, if you get the electric charging rate, it can be even under $1,
It can't be under $1, okay.
but it can be more like $1.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say $1.60 seems to be the common figure.
Yes, go ahead.
Are they intelligent enough that if you leave it plugged in overnight, it stops drawing a charge once it's full? Okay.
And it just slows down.
Wait,
to
that
protect the
bicycle's gonna cost you a lot of money right there.
Yeah.
That bike you got yesterday, that's gonna be, your light bill goes up $200 a month. It's that electric bicycle, which you got no rebate on.
No rebate.
And
I don't know how you're gonna make it.
you're gonna have to multiply by 3 because you have 3 children.
That's right.
And
you
you're-
get 1 for 1 and not.
Yeah, that's right.
Now you set a precedent. Yeah.
But I'm waiting for the rebate.
I bet you went home last night, said to his wife, David, I lost $400. Oh, okay, there, go ahead.
Okay, so that is it on the changes to the goals in section 3, and then when we do talk about section 2, and this is something that is changed by the House Appropriations Amendment, just remember that when it's talking about the $6.25 million for the level 3 chargers along the highway, that they need to be placed consistent with these goals.
Could you just say it again? And I apologize, I wasn't paying attention, I apologize. For what the feds are saying this, but the transportation is saying this, so they wanna.
So the goal that was established last year, so a recent goal, was 5 miles from the exit, 15 miles between charging stations. A new federal requirement is that the chargers need to be placed within, to have used this federal money within 1 mile of the exits. It does not also say that it needs to be within 25 miles of a charging station along the highway network. But the Agency of Transportation, when this came up in House Transportation as to what the goal should be, if it should change, and discussion around the fact that the federal requirement had changed for the proximity to the exit, the Agency of Transportation said, we think even though the federal requirement doesn't mandate that to get this federal money, they be within 25 miles of each other, we think that's a better goal. And the House Transportation went with that recommendation. And I know that Patrick has prepared slide decks about this. I've seen them. He's the person who will be best suited, if Michelle can answer your question, about the switch from 5 miles to 1 mile and 50 miles to 25.
Nancy, I have a question for consistency. We write out 1 mile, but you use numeric for 25. Why don't you spell out the 25?
Because the drafting manual says, without regard to whether or not another number is in the sentence, you always write out 11 and high. You always put in numbers 11 and higher, and in words 10 and lower. The drafting
It's
manual
gonna be hard to
specifically
find land,
addresses.
though, sometimes. How do you find a spot within it takes a lot of land, I think, you gotta, to have those stations, right? I mean, you gotta have parking and. How do they do that?
No, the big thing is you need to have the power supply.
Yeah, but
that's-
even after you get the power supply, you gotta have the land available to park a bunch of cars.
No,
Or at least.
that's why they oftentimes have Walmart is one of the biggest across the country because they've got big parking lots
There's
and.
not a Walmart every 5 miles.
No, but Marty's, there's parking and there'll be cars.
No, there are areas, I'm just saying, otherwise you gotta buy a piece of land or something, or a gas station.
And there are people that are interested in the same, we've got property that would meet this requirement, so.
So there, go ahead.
So that came up in one of the conversations, and I just wonder if we want to legislate and mandate that these be designed in a way that at least 4 cars could pull up next to it, because otherwise if they just put them like up against an embankment, you're gonna get 2 cars, and I can see people making fun of the legislature.
takes
for not
land.
making it about.
They do that.
Okay.
Like all the Walmart Electrify America stations are that way.
The one photo in that presentation by, I forget who it was.
But sometimes there's just no room in the middle. Most parking, like small parking lots are like that, where you just park up against the edge of the property. There isn't any middle spaces. And then you also have to trench into the pavement. You gotta tear the cost is a lot higher to do it in the middle of the parking lot.
So my point would be, do we want to say if you're gonna give public money to chargers that it has to be in a designed location that 4 cars can sit parked
I think
accessible?
they would do that.
Michelle's shaking her head over here.
Sorry. The advantage of sitting behind you. Senator Mazza, I'd be happy to respond to that.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. Michelle Boomheimer, Vermont Agency of Transportation. So 2 things. First of all, I think we don't want to constrain and dictate the design parameters for how we would set these up, because as Senator Perchuk has pointed out, every site will have a different condition, and obviously the site owner is going to want to maximize the parking arrangement to best fit this amenity into the scheme of all the other needs for parking. And so I think that the design itself and the site conditions will take care of creating the most effective and efficient means of setting up the charging stations. The second thing I would add is, when I first came in, you were talking about the change in the parameters for how frequently we would have a fast charger. We're asking to go from 5 miles to 1 mile and then every 25 miles on the state highway network. The interstate interchange 1 mile parameter lines up with the federal guidelines for the EVSE charging program, which is going to be about $21 million for Vermont over the next 5 years. And that program requires that it be within 1 mile of the interstate interchange. So we're setting up to align with that. And then the administration's goal is to have a fast charger every 25 miles on the state highway network. And so since we're adjusting the one number, we decided we would just put it just the other number. And that's an aspirational goal. It's going to take time. And all of these things will be developed together based on the funding availability. For instance, we have to submit a plan no later than August to Federal Highway Administration to let them know how we would plan to deploy our network. And they have designated corridors and charge corridor pending and corridor approved, designations that we've already gone through for several of our routes. And those are like the first priority of where the charging needs to be placed, considering other charging that's already out there. And so they will, we'll say, here's where we want to put it under the program guidance. They'll approve us, and then we can go forth with implementing the plan. So, it's a new experience. It's a new process from Federal Highway Administration. And hopefully we have provided enough, not only guidance, but, sort of flexibility to be able to respond to the federal needs.
And just to close the book on this conversation, I would argue, or at least raise the point that it seems like gas distribution units have a lot of safety parameters around how far they have to be from the building and how they're positioning. So I'm just, as much as we want it to be flexible for the property owners, I feel like there's some inherent responsibility on us to be thoughtful in dictating that they don't put these right up next to buildings if there's a fire hazard, or that there's some consideration for traffic flow. Do we have any parameters on what public monies can be, how they have to be designed, these level 3 charging stations, if public monies are used? Are there any rules about how they have to be situated on a lot?
Well, I guess what I would say as in terms of fire safety or hazard safety, the general parameters under electrical code guidelines would apply to these units. And so whatever sort of those parameters are would be implicated in installing these units. And I don't think that we dictate like the flow of traffic for gas stations. Obviously there are rules around the underground storage tanks and that sort of thing. I guess I'm not seeing a life safety issue that we can solve by legislating it versus engineering it.
So with development review boards, when they look at a gas station, if a gas station's coming in, they definitely think about traffic flows. Because if it backs up, and I'm just thinking about people with a dead battery, where are they, and they're waiting to get to it, where are they gonna position their car, and then it could back up into the highway? Like there are definitely considerations of traffic flow when it comes to building any new facility.
Yeah, I'm not saying there aren't. I'm saying that I don't think we legislate the state statute.
So
At the DRB level, yeah, I can see where that occurs.
My concern is how they're gonna be able to charge. Can they charge what they want to charge and make the money? I mean, that's gonna be a big factor because gasoline right now, they're competitive. They got the signs up, everybody, but electric, I mean, what if a guy wants, if he's in a remote area, wants to charge 20 cents a kilowatt or $1 a kilowatt? Who's making the profit? That's going to be a big issue, I think, because gas stations are going to be replaced with charging stations. We know that in the future of many years, but and how they're going to make the profit on their electric. Every magazine I read now about nationwide, they're all concerned about gas easing into electric. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but how much money they're gonna make on the deal.
Right.
All said and done, that's gonna be a big factor.
That's a great point, Senator Maza. And in our current program where we're providing public funding for charging stations, we have requirements for price transparency and also for the amount of profit that can be derived. So we do control that.
So let me ask Michelle, we're putting this money out and it's a charge point and companies like that, that we're
Typically,
basically, are you doing RFPs? Is that what you're doing?
we're doing RFPs. Historically, that's what we've done. We're looking at potentially different models for this particular highway charging system. We're gonna be having conversations with the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association to figure out, what's the best model that, because a lot of these stations will likely be located at gas stations. And if gas stations want to be in this business, what are the considerations we need to be taking into account? I'm envisioning a program whereby we're saying, we've got $6.25 million to deploy this coming year. We're gonna have, just like we do with smaller highway contracts, we're gonna have, put out an RFP and get 6 retainer consultants or contractors on board. And then we're gonna issue work orders for them to do a block of charging stations here, there, and wherever. So we have diversity in the market. We're not giving the money to all the one vendor and then getting caught up in things. And we're providing opportunities for multiple partners.
So looking to the future and our goals in terms of the take up of EVs, I'm sure there's been some analysis of how many charging stations what you have to have for capacity to support that goal.
We do have.
And how many would that be?
I can't remember the exact number, but Drive Electric Vermont did an analysis and we have a slide on that, and I will text Patrick and ask him to put that slide up.
I think he's on the agenda for 9:30, so I think he's probably gonna go over it.
Yeah, okay, I was just wondering how, where we are now
Yep.
relative to where we need to be. And
Yeah, based on the climate plans, projection of the number of vehicles we're going to need, we have calculated the number of fast charging stations we're going to need.
I assume that, I just didn't know how big.
And
The number
it's in alignment, actually, pretty close alignment with the amount of resources we are likely to have. Like, it's in the $20 to $25 million range over the next 5 years, so.
So on that same thread, my understanding is that there are many towns in Vermont that don't have the population to justify a full development review board and local zoning code. So I am still somewhat hung on the fact that if we don't provide some parameters for how these EV stations should be situated, then there's 20 years from now when a ton of people have EVs and they see a publicly funded charging station in a terrible spot out in the country somewhere, they're gonna think all the legislators sitting around the table right here didn't know what we were doing. So that's what's going through my mind.
Are the RPCs, I assume they're involved in this as well?
Not
yet.
really. I think we probably have engaged them in some awareness level, but Drive Electric Vermont has, along with, our staff and the staff of ACCD have been doing a lot of the planning analysis. In terms of specific site identification, so far, the grant applicants who have come to the Agency of Commerce, we expect them to come having made the land deals and all of that. And to the extent that there is a need in a particular area to help identify a location, that would be something the RPCs could potentially assist.
A lot of interesting subject of this. This is a big word, but like when gasoline first started, I guess it must have been a hassle when they put portable pumps and everything else. But Michelle, as we go through this, if you see scenarios that I know you rehearsed in the house, if you see scenarios, just raise your hand. We're trying to get. We're not ready to build today, but we're just trying. Okay, go right ahead.
Okay, so you've got one more section from me, and then you'll be hearing from the agency and Drive Electric on this language. So I'm gonna jump all the way to page 30, section 22. And this is the part of the T-bill where There are small changes that are being made to the T-bill from last year, and I know we just talked about a change to the T-bill from last year, and that House Transportation wanted earlier in the bill, because it links to that $6.25 million and the placement. But this is the section that comes after those three sections that we talked about yesterday with the shifting of the $5,000 to administer the Ebike grant program. And this is making a change to the $1 million that you put towards charging stations at multi-unit dwellings last year. And for the most part, the majority of the changes you're seeing are the editors, because this was getting put in this bill, wanted to take the hyphen out of multi-unit. So you're seeing multi-unit as one word throughout. So I'm now going to be consistent and always use multi-unit as one word until someone tells me it should have hyphen in it. So multi-unit is struck out with the hyphen and replaced with multi-unit without the hyphen. The substantive change that you're going to see in the language is, you'll see it on line 17. Level 2 chargers is struck out and replaced with EVSE. One of the things that section 29.
I'm on line 11.
This is a previous page, page 30.
Page 30, line 17, in the section heading.
Oh,
I jumped ahead.
Oh.
Well, it's not a substantial change in the section heading, but that was the only place in section 29 that mentioned what types of chargers the grants could be for. And one, that creates a little bit of an ambiguity because that isn't law, that's just the section heading. So is the agency only limited to level 2 chargers? Setting aside that question, the agency, in getting to the point where they're about to start deploying grants of that $1 million, thinks that it would be beneficial to multi-unit dwellings to have the grants be for level 2 chargers and in some cases level 1 chargers. So the change is to add, and this is on page 31, starting in line 11, where you were, Senator Kitchell, a definition for electric vehicle supply equipment, and then using EVSE as defined here throughout the balance of the section, and it would be level 1 chargers or level 2 chargers. So when the Agency of Commerce and Community Development is deploying these grants, they can be for level 1 chargers or level 2 chargers. And this section would be like some of the other sections making changes to the last T-bill, effective retroactively to July 1 of 2021. And then the only other change that you're going to see is on the top of page 32, line 1, was talking about building off of the existing DW EVSE grant program. It seems like it's shifted away from that being its name, and now it's just the EVSE grant program. For those of you who are new, the first pot of funding that went to electric vehicle supply equipment came from some of the VW settlement funds. So that's where the VW and the name came from.
Expended.
I believe it's
God,
all.
also, we've talked about it for years. When did we ever get to that Volkswagen?
I cannot, Megan O'Toole could speak to the full amount of the VW settlement funds, but for the
15% would be for the purchase of light-duty electric supply equipment, and so it was 2.8 million. You could use 400,000 for admin and 2.4 for chargers.
yeah, that I believe is all.
Yeah, that's,
Go ahead.
I just happen to have that.
So this multi-unit dwelling came up in my city council meeting on Monday night, and South Burlington is putting in a lot of affordable housing and really trying to encourage concentrated development on a variety of spots. And one councilor was asking for just what we had. So I said, we did this last year, but I did notice that it was only $1 million that we allocated, and I said I would dig into to get an idea of how much we actually did provision. Did the whole $1 million go out in grant money for the multi-housing? And then if there's more money needed, I know South Burlington is interested in knowing how we can make sure these chargers come in online as these new housing projects come up.
So Senator Mazel, I'll let Senator Chittenden know that Bronwyn Cook from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development is on your schedule for today, and she can give you the full status update of the $1 million. I believe it's in process right now, and they've had a pre-application meeting with interested parties. That's right.
South Burlington needed some.
And my tidbit that I will just add to that is the governor's recommend had $10 million in ARPA money going to ACCD for multi-unit dwellings, community venues and attractions, and workplaces. The House Appropriations Amendment preserved that 10 million, but they switched it to general funds. So there are not the ARPA strings that would need to be complied with. So I expect that when you look at section 2 of the T-bill next week, you will not see that $10 million there because House Appropriations has pulled it out and put it in the big bill. But there will be sort of this background conversation of, and there's $10 million that's going to XYZ purposes, and $3 million going to charging stations at state parks and fishing access areas. So that's the 19 and a quarter for charging stations and the 2 bills.
Yeah.
Do you know either Michelle or Anthea where we are with the codes? Because I think building codes will require them to put in charging stations if they have to go through an occupation permit, if they're of that size housing project. So whether there's money or not, they're gonna have to do it at some point.
It's just part of the construction at this point.
Right. You know, a charging station for so many units, kind of like with parking
Yeah.
requirements.
Like 1.5.
Yeah, I can't remember where we are in that, but it could be in the stretch code or it could be in the code, or I can't remember.
We brought that up in institutions as well, as far as some of these rehab apartment buildings and stuff, that they were really not, in my opinion, being forward thinking about that, and really hadn't been really planning for that. So we've been pushing on that side as well, to at least put in the, while you're doing the whatever you're doing, tearing and fixing and all that, at least put in the infrastructure of that to at least get it to the outside of the building, so that we don't have to go back and spend millions of dollars to redo these buildings.
Senator Perschlik, I believe that Dave Roberts can probably address that when he comes on. I don't have the specific.
I'm done, and I could stay with great comments. That is the least interesting part of your morning testimony, because now you're going to hear from Dave Roberts, Patrick, and Ron on all of these programs.
Okay, Patrick Murphy with us this morning.
Take us down. There we go. Got it. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Patrick Murphy, for the record, from V-Trans. I was able to catch a lot of the conversation that's happened this morning. So I just, I've got a list of some of the questions that you all have, and I can kind of go through that to start. So on the just generally on the suggested language for goals, as Anthea had mentioned, these are being updated from last year's transportation bill, which reflected prior guidance for the alternative fuel corridor designation, and also just prior goals. So there's the, in addition to what was the 5-mile radius around an interstate exit, and the 50 miles between one charger and the next charger along the interstate and state highway system. There's also the goal that continues that we have a fast charger at every exit along the interstate. So that's not related either to prior guidance or the current NEVI, the National Electric Vehicle and Infrastructure Guidance. This is just a goal that we have to build out a system that really is convenient for the levels of EV adoption that we'd like to see. So that guidance has changed with the new NEVI program, the Federal Infrastructure Program, and that 1 mile distance from the prior 5-mile distance is not as the crow flies, but a linear distance, because it's meant to create a national system that's, again, the most convenient for people traveling along the highway corridors. And then in addition to that, we've shortened the distance between chargers from 50 to 25. And again, as Michelle had mentioned, that's aspirational. But we are leading the nation right now in EV chargers per capita, and we want to be able to continue to do that. And we think that this funding through the federal infrastructure bill really will allow us to do that. So to Senator Chittenden's questions about siding designs, There is some guidance, initial guidance around sort of the most desirable siting conditions, lighting, and the like, and there'll be more specific guidance issued on that by May 13th, I believe. But because there are 4 150 kilowatt ports now required to be able to charge at that level simultaneously, that just by default means that there needs to be at least 4 spaces at each of those locations. We envision, I think, that most, if not all of these, will be on already built out parking spaces that presumably will have gone through those regulatory processes, the local development review boards, whatever it might be, to be configured in a way that's safe for travel through that property. So those are a couple of the things. And then Senator Kitchell, I believe, had a question about the level of the number of units that we would need to support the levels of adoption that we're expecting. And so we've done some preliminary analysis around that. And it really depends on a number of different factors. So that $10 million pot of funding that was referenced just a few minutes ago also plays a role into how extensive a fast charging network we need. So it's dependent upon what the percentage of housing units are that have access to home charging. And in the state of Vermont, there's about something like 77% of the units are housing units are single family homes, but that leaves 20+% that don't necessarily have easy access to charging. And so that's the idea behind this current pilot program for multi-unit housing, which has an application date of April 1st. So no money has been yet obligated, but we'll begin to review applications here in April. So that plays a big role in then if more and more people have access to at-home charging, the amount of funding that needs to go out the door to public level 2 and fast charging it doesn't necessarily need to be as high. But the preliminary analysis that we've done is somewhere in the order of about another 250 level 2 chargers, and that would be a combination of workplace and public chargers, and then 160 DC fast chargers. And to give you a sense of what that might cost, there's some cost estimates that we've done in prior presentations that for an entire location that has those required four 150 kilowatt ports, it might be around $400,000. So $100,000 you can kind of figure as a ballpark for one fast charging port. And that depends too, after we've been certified to have been fully built out according to the NEVI guidance, there may be situations where we don't add 4 ports, where we may be adding 2 ports, say for every exit along the highway corridor to start. And so that those will have different costs because the installation costs aren't kind of distributed across 4, they're instead distributed across 2. So those
after the figures you gave, like the 160 for the fast charge, those additive, are they on top of what we have now, or are
That's
they?
right.
Oh, okay, let's think.
So it's there. You know, each site is going to be different. They're going to have, and that's why I think Michelle has mentioned that it's important to have some flexibility in the site designs. That every site will have different configurations and different needs based on where panel capacity and where it's located and the like. So those can add to installation costs for sure. There may be some places that don't have access to three-phase power where it makes sense financially to invest in battery storage, renewable energy solutions, and that again adds costs that are eligible for federal funding reimbursement. But it's going to mean that certain locations will have higher costs than others. And then lastly, I think there was a question about building codes that maybe Dave can speak to. As far as I know, there's a requirement for maybe 4% of parking spaces need to serve electric vehicles. And just to make sure that we're clear, the funding that is been appropriated, authorized for this multi-unit dwelling program is not going to new developments. It's going to developments that haven't been subject to those new building codes. So we're not kind of investing in things that need to be done anyway. We're investing in being able to kind of take this older housing stock and bring it up to what is now being required in other places.
No by consent, no multi-housing. That's right,
Dave, did you want to speak to that?
Sure,
Yeah.
I can jump in. So for the record, Dave Roberts, I'm a senior consultant and Drive Electric Vermont coordinator at the EIC. And on the building energy code issues, just reminding myself of the various things. So it used to be a stretch code requirement, which would factor in when projects were subject to Act 250, so larger developments. But in the last update, some of the provisions moved into the base code. So at this stage, as I understand it, multifamily development with 10 or more units, it is in the base code that about 4% of their parking should be EV ready, which could mean level 1 or level 2 charging. And I know there has been some conversation about maybe 4% is not, maybe that number should be higher. There's a balance that I think the Department of Public Service is trying to strike there in terms of the potential added cost and all the housing affordability issues that folks are struggling with. But there is a building energy code update. They do this fairly regularly, and that's underway right now. And they actually have public meetings Wednesday, April 6th for the residential side of things and Friday, April 8th for the commercial side of things. So for anybody who's listening or others, you may want to have the department come in and provide an update on where they're at with those those programs and seeing if they're thinking about increasing that requirement, which ideally from my perspective it would be nice to see that 4% increase because it is such a cost-effective time to make a development EV ready. And if we're going to hit these ambitious goals that the state has, making charging available at people's homes is really a great way to do that.
Right. Do you know what they do for a 20 unit? 4% is just under 1. So it seems like you'd want a minimum or 4%, whatever's higher.
I think it's, they do some rounding. There are some tables in the actual code that I don't have in front of me at the moment, but I think that's just 1 is the minimum if you're, if you don't have many parking spaces, and then it's 4% as you get above that. And the commercial side of things, there are similar requirements for commercial developments, but they vary a bit depending on the type of commercial property use. So is it a retail store? Is it an employer? So they have a few kind of different types of land uses and different requirements for them in the actual code.
Question? Okay. Anything else to add at this point? Yes, Senator Chittum.
Well, I guess one. So you mentioned Act 250 stretch code, and I'm just thinking of the communities out there that are gonna have like 8 units or 4 units, will that trigger Act 250? And do we need, because that's where I guess the questions are with the accessibility to these grants when they're not gonna go through the Act 250 process with the towns that don't have zoning.
Yeah, I'm not an expert, so may be helpful to have somebody in who can speak more directly. There are stretch code requirements for single family homes to provide a minimum of level 1 charging. So that's just an outlet in a garage in a new home. And municipalities can adopt the stretch code as sort of the municipal version of the base code. I believe South Burlington is one of the few municipalities in the state that has taken that step. But would encourage you to have somebody from the department and or environmental board in to speak more to those requirements.
Any other questions? Yes.
Well, I didn't know if Patrick was going to go over section 3 or was just answering questions. I don't know if that was.
Maybe, yeah, we'll bring it.
We haven't gone over section 3 of the bill. We only went up, oh, no, not section 3. I meant section 2, I guess, is what I was thinking, but we're not going over that. Yeah, so we did go over section 3. I was getting 2 and 3 mixed up. Never mind.
So I think
For punishment, we're gonna have to go feed Senator Sports.
Anything else you got for us this morning, Patrick or Dave?
just the last note I have, there was a question about are the RPCs involved, and that's as part of the NEVI plan, the Federal Infrastructure Plan guidance. We're going to be reaching out to a number of different stakeholders, and the RPCs are definitely among those that are highlighted that we'll be talking with. So, and we've just had discussions as well about including in next year's TPI guidance some tasks that relate to EV SE planning in their own communities, and that will help the state in its statewide planning.
You have no charging station on interstate, right? There's nothing on the interstate in the rest of it.
It's prohibited.
You can't
Yeah,
do
so
it.
you gotta get out.
Besides, you can't have faith, there's no power, well, at the rest areas, it's just what, not phase 3 then.
Probably in most cases, no.
There's not many rest areas, right?
No,
No.
it's limited, but I didn't know, I thought that we were gonna have to do that.
I just thought that in some of those rest areas, if we could ask for an exemption, it would be, I don't know if we've ever tried it, they just said, don't even ask, because it's never gonna happen. Some places, there's enough parking and it would make sense that we could get an exemption, or we could do it.
Is it
for free.
because of a federal mandate?
Yeah,
Because
you
it's
can't
a
sell.
federal.
You can't sell, although we do have vending machines, so we are selling.
It's because it's blind and visually
Yeah,
impaired that are doing the vending, so it's a special.
we could donate it to the legislature.
Yeah, so if we did it like for free or gave money to the Danville Historical Society, we could get it.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, appreciate it.
Yes.
We'll be back in touch, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you.
Take care.
Jane.
Michelle, anything you have to add this morning before we take a break?
Not a thing. Thank you.
You're happy with everything, right? You're happy.
So we could do level 1s, but we'd have to give away the electricity at charging stations. Like we just have plug-ins on the light poles or something,
I suppose you could.
but we would be giving away the electricity.
So many decisions you have to make. seriously.
It's something, yeah.
They brought an extension cord, they just.
I'm gonna,
Through the door,
listen, I don't have gas pumps, I'm gonna get an extension cord and run out.
unplug the vending machine.
I don't have gas pumps in my store, but I'm gonna get an extension cord, run out, plug it in, charge them $2, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I said to Senator Ingalls, when he gets electricity up this.
Yeah, I get electricity up my way. I'll tell you what, there's exciting things coming.
You have just an extension cord, they're gonna be taking up a lot of your parking lot, I can tell you, because how long would it take?
We're getting a connection fee.
Overnight, just about, yeah.
Interesting subject, I'll tell you, there's gonna be a lot of matters, a major things nationwide. It's not
So we'll be going offline.
Yeah,
for break.
Jeannie, take us offline till 10:30.